Hello all, welcome to Kalam IAS Academy. So this is Priyanka, the faculty at Kalam IAS for essay. So today we'll be going for a detailed analysis of one topic of the UPSC essay paper 2023. Let's get started. So the topic chosen is thinking is like a game. It does not begin unless there is an opposite team. So what do you understand by this topic? Okay, so first the emphasis is on the thinking as a process. Okay, and it's like a game, as the topic is saying, it's like a game with the help of the opposite team. Okay, so there is two sides in a game. Okay, and each team employs their critical thinking skills to present their compelling arguments. They would be countering the opposite team's points as well. Then, after so many debates and discussions, deliberations, then they reach a logical conclusion. Thus, we can say that the thinking or the thought process that we have been going through achieves its purpose. Okay, so for this game to go on, there is a need always. There is a need of a external agent or a internal agent as well. You can say the internal conscience to play the game of arguments and debates. Okay, that we are calling here as opposition team or the opposite team as per the essay topic. Okay, understood. So the dimensions goes like this. You can pause down the video now and generate your own dimensions and then check with these dimensions which I have generated. Okay, the first dimension is you should be explaining what is thinking representing here and what is opposite team representing here. Then you come to the second point, that why and how does thinking begin with opposition. Okay, so always remember, when you look at the topic, the dimensions which you are able to generate just by looking at the topic per se, that becomes your primary arguments of the essay. That becomes your primary macro dimension of the essay. Okay, so here the primary macro dimension of the essay which should be addressed first is why and how does thinking begin with opposition. So you should be telling about why aspect, and how aspect may you can tell the examples. Okay, this aspect is done. Then you would also address that what are the hindrances to the thinking process. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि thinking process का कोई hindrance नहीं है, कोई challenges नहीं है. So what are those hindrances? Okay, then in the next fourth and fifth point, I would discuss the counter argument of the essay. That means the antithesis or the critical analysis of the essay, to be very particular. Okay, so thinking is not always a competitive process again. So it can be collaborative as well. It can be with coordination as well. Okay, then the fifth point comes that it does not necessarily involve external opposite teams either. Okay, so you can do that by your own. Okay, you can play that game with your internal conscience. Okay, through meditation, through self reflection, self introspection. Okay, so that is how the questions are generated as macro dimensions of the essay. Okay, and then you would come to the current relevance of the topic. So this current relevance, I always tell my students to write in the exam to get that above average marks. And again, the dimensions or the examples of this very current relevance aspect of the essay, that you can write under a separate heading, or you can just blend those arguments and examples within the respective headings, respective dimensions elaborated from beforehand. Okay, and then you come to the way ahead part of the essay, where you would be talking about some value perspective. What are the elements of a healthy thinking process? Okay, so let's discuss one by one. So for introduction, I have taken an anecdote. Okay, so while traveling on a train from Durban to Pretoria, Gandhiji encountered racial discrimination when he was forced to leave a first class compartment due to his ethnicity. This encounter ignited his satyagraha journey, illustrating how opposing forces can catalyze innovative thinking and social change. So here the opposing forces was referred to racial discrimination. This very incident, it ignited him to take up his satyagraha journey and thus our independence, our freedom struggle. Okay, so that's how you can introduce the essay, which is fitting in completely with the topic of the essay. This is called an anecdote. Okay, then comes the body. Okay, before that, you would be also talking about the scope of the essay that comes in the introduction, where you would be just dropping in some of the macro dimensions which we discussed in the first slide. Okay, in order to say the examiner that you have interpreted the topic well, and these are the dimensions upon which I am going to discuss in the rest of the essay. So this will create a captivating impression on the examiner to read the rest of your essay, right? So while coming to the body, as we have discussed, you should first explain the thinking perspective. The thinking, what does it exactly represent? Okay, it represents different arguments, weighing pros and cons, then diverse opinions. Okay, similarly, opposite team, it represents contrasting and opposition views or challenges. Okay, then you come to the next macro dimension of the essay, that how and why does thinking begin with opposition? That is the first macro dimension of the essay you should be discussing. So in the organization level, you can talk about that how thinking, critical thinking, fosters innovation. You can take the example of rivalry between the technological giants, Apple and Microsoft, that has led to innovation in personal computing. So this is how you should be creating your argument first and then the example. Okay, argument is that it fosters innovation. You should be creating a context first and then you would be giving the example. Okay, then if you talk about the legal proceedings, what happens there in a courtroom? Okay, the prosecution and the defense, they act as the opposing sides and they place their arguments in front of each other. They go through the strategic thinking to build their cases. Okay, and then they counter each other very effectively. Then a logical conclusion is reached. Right. Again, when we talk about the parliamentary debates, there is always opposition. Okay, and opposition, it allows the examination of various viewpoints and it helps in formulation of informed policies. Then you can give example of one nation, one election when it is at the debating stage. You can talk about the GST reform debates, how we debated for a very long time before we actually executed the reform. Okay, then you can talk about the scientific research. In scientific research, what happens? The opposite teams of researchers, they have different hypotheses or theories with them about a particular phenomenon, and then they conduct experiments. Okay, and then they gather evidence for each other and they place while criticizing the other researchers' viewpoints. Okay, then coming next, you can talk about the sports strategy. Okay, chess is a classical example of the game where two opposing players, they engage in deep strategic thinking. Okay, you can talk about the American football where the players, they often engage in strategic thinking before taking a move. They anticipate the opponent's views, the moves, and they adjust their tactics accordingly and take quick decisions during the game. So this is how the opposition, they ignite the thinking process. Okay, so you should be taking the keywords of the essay again and again in examples or the arguments in order to show the examiner that you're closely writing to the topic. This is a best practice again. Okay, then you can talk about that how opposition team, it helps identification of a problem. It prompts individual to identify the problem. Okay, then this is the argument of the essay, and then you can give number of examples to support your argument. Okay, you can talk about Rajaram Mohan Roy, how his social reform efforts against the practice of sati began with the opposition to this harmful tradition, leading to the identification of a significant social problem like sati. Okay, how the economic reforms, that is LPG reforms, were initiated in response to a bigger problem then, that is the economic challenges which we were facing in the form of BOP crisis. Okay, how the demonetization was the solution for the black money problem identified then. Okay, and how in today's world, like there is a need to reduce carbon emissions and to combat global warming, and thus the solution came out of thinking that we should transition to electric vehicles eventually. So these arguments and examples must be written to support the theme of the essay. Okay, then we come to the hindrances of the thinking process, that is the next macro dimension of the essay. Okay, so these are the quotations you can use. That is, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably the reason why so few engage in it, by Henry Ford. Then again, thinking is seeing. When we stop looking at labels, at prejudices, at fears, at dogmas and rituals, then we see clearly. So these quotations you can use throughout your essay, your body. Okay, so coming to the hindrances of the thinking process, we can talk about that the polarization views, okay, the gridlock in politics, how it is leading to delay in passing necessary reforms, how we just experienced in case of GST reforms. Again, the ego and resistance to change. Ego and resistance to change, how it is a hindrance to the healthy thinking process or the critical thinking process. How lack of information again is a hindrance to the thinking process, to the healthy thinking process, to the critical thinking process. So you can quote this particular quotation, that is, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge, by Stephen Hawking. Okay, then you come to the biases and prejudices. This carries a lot of relevance in today's society. Okay, you can talk about the concept of confirmation bias. When you always seek information that confirms your existing beliefs, and that's how you become a prejudiced person. You are not open to any kind of thinking, any kind of ideas, any kind of visionary thought process. Okay, and this thus stops you from reaching the fundamental truth of life, fundamental truth of the universe. Okay, and there where the thinking process, the ultimate goal of thinking process is not achieved. Okay, and then come to the emotional distress. How strong emotions like fear, anger or stress, they become a hindrance to the critical thinking process. You cannot do that in your stage of fear or anger, you cannot do that properly. How poor time management, they can be a hindrance. Okay, you go for rushed decision making and not after a proper critical thinking process. How your poor physical health, including sleep deprivation and nutritional deficiencies, can be a hindrance to your thinking process again. So this is how you can create your dimensions and examples for a particular dimension. Okay, so till now, hope you are clear that how questions are generated, how dimensions are generated, and this is again very much far away from the conventional pestle approach. You are generating your own questions, you are generating your arguments, examples to support, and again you are very much closely writing to the topic. Okay, that is what the UPSC directive says. Then you would come to the counter argument of the essay, not exactly the counter argument, but again the antithesis of the essay, which should always come in your essay to show your critical analysis skills. Okay, so first one is that thinking is not always a competitive process. So it can be collaborative and cooperative as well. When people work together to generate ideas, find solutions, to achieve common goals. So you can talk about the community planning, you can talk about the healthcare teams working for COVID, you can talk about the environmental conservation, you can talk about the open source software, you can talk about the international diplomacy here, where where there is a need of collaboration and cooperation. Okay, and then you can also talk about the introspective thinking when there is no such external opposing team there, but you're fighting within yourself with your conscience. Okay, for the self reflection, or you're meditating once in a day. Okay, to just self introspect yourself. So it does not involve any external opposite teams, but within you. You're fighting within you. Okay, so these perspectives should be there in your essay to have those above average marks. Right. Then we talk about the current relevance. As I've already pointed out, you can talk about the parliamentary law process, how there is an importance of opposite team to bring out various divergent views and making the law process very inclusive. Okay, how participatory governance is very important today, where people ask answers from the government. Okay, people wear the thinking cap, they ask the government to be a better government. Okay, social audit, right to information. People are acting as the opposite team, and that's how it is nudging the government to bring better reforms for the society. Okay, you can talk about the role of media, how it is not taking the particular channels, the TV channels, they're spreading fake news and they're not taking inclusive views. They are spreading just one-sided viewpoints and making a person prejudiced. You can talk about the WhatsApp University. Okay, how one-sided viewpoints are always shared, and that's how a person becomes very much biased towards one viewpoint. Okay, and thus the ultimate purpose of thinking, ultimate purpose of critical analysis is not achieved. Okay, then you come to the way ahead point. That is the value perspective of the essay which I was talking about. Okay, you should be speaking about some values which are essential for healthy thinking. That is, you must be having proper information, knowledge base, you must be having curiosity mindset, you must be having imagination skill, you must be having above all the patience and persistence to think for long, think in a healthy manner. Okay, you should be having again a proper motivation with you, and last but not the least, the language and communication should be decent enough for the expression of thought process. So this you can use as the quotation. All the problems of the world could be settled easily if men were only willing to think, by Watson. This is how you can blend the quotations if at all you remember. It is again not mandatory to remember quotations if one is not comfortable with. Okay, and the quotations must be actually fitting in to the dimension which you are discussing at that point of time, right? So hope I'm clear with everything, whichever I discussed with you, the macro arguments, the examples, how they are generated. Okay, so let's come to the last part of the essay, that is conclusion. So in the conclusion, you should be taking a balanced view always. So here in this case, you would be talking about that different contexts and tasks may call for different modes of thought. Some may involve collaboration and some may involve competition or opposition. Okay, and you should be bringing the anecdote also here, the reference of anecdote. That is a circular approach you should be following for anecdote based essays. Okay, so had Gandhiji not been encountered with racial discrimination as the opposing force, okay, perhaps he wouldn't had taken up his satyagraha journey for the independence of India. That's how you can end the essay, or with a quotation if you know. But the mention of anecdote is very much mandatory if you have started the essay with an anecdote. Okay, so hope I'm clear with everything. Then lastly, I would emphasize on the fact that don't get disheartened if at all you're feeling that you have not written a good essay, okay, here I'll be showing you that many toppers of this year, they have scored like below average marks, which we often consider to be below average. Okay, but still they have gotten a rank. Okay, so rank 1 is Ishita Kishore. So she scored around 137 marks. Garima Loya, rank 2, 131 marks. Then Uma Harathi, 119 marks. Then see, rank 437 scored 99 marks only. But still, he is in the list. Okay, you would be surprised to know here that rank 17 scored only 109 marks in essay. Okay, so don't draw a conclusion that you would be scoring this much, that much, and you won't be getting selected. No, this is not the time. Just focus on your work and practice essays as much as possible if at all you are giving mains next year. And for the rest of the people, all the very best for the coming papers. Thank you so much.